Welcome to Lights in the Night with your host, Russell Johnson. Uncover the truth about alien contact and hear from insiders who reveal the evidence. Stay tuned.
Hey, good afternoon. Russ Johnson here. Hey, we have a lot of guests in the studio, and we have a guest on the telephone. We got Danny. She's a student here in the university. She wants to be star of stage, screen, and television with us. And so Freddie Santori, he's
How are
the
you, Russ?
executive producer. Sally, she has her own program.
Hi.
Call me Zena, Sally Bernard. And I'm here with a guy he's brilliant. This gentleman, Norman, he's brilliant. He has his own website. And Norman, what is that website? I keep forgetting.
Norman, you there?
Is he there?
That website is karmicscrolls.com. Like think of Dead Sea Scrolls, karmic, K-A-R-M-I-C, karmicscrolls.com.
Yeah, he has a lot of information. He's a student of this for many years. How long have you been delving into the alien world, Norman?
35 years. 35
Wow,
years.
no wonder he knows a lot. He's really steeped in. Have you been read in the secret space program? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, that's something that I've been looking at really since that time, about almost 40 years ago.
Wow. See, he knows all the players, Billy Carson, Dr. Greer, Linda Mutant, how he knows them all. He's a researcher, so he has the kind of information that we all need. Listen, we want to point up about people, this is basic 101 for us. I'm going to keep it soft and easy and slow. That's it. We have Danny. Do you think Danny has been abducted? She's got some interest in all of this. Norman?
Yeah, I think that my perspective on the abductions and the UFO activity, alien activity, is going to be controversial, and it's probably going to be provocative and may trigger a few people. But one of your previous guests, I think you had him on a couple times, George Green, who was contactee of the Pleiadians. I worked with him back in the 90s, and that's where a lot of this information is coming from.
Wow, well, you got a lot of information. By the way, he has a website that's still up, but he left us about a year or so ago, and that's nohoax, HOAX.net. So you can go and see some of George Green's material, or you can Google him and pull down some of the things that he has talked about. He was a multi-millionaire. He traveled all over the world, and he was a builder. Tell a little bit about George Green.
George Green came to me and met me at my home back in maybe 1990 and, gave me his entire story. I'd kind of already heard a lot of it, and especially through the publication for which he was the publisher at that time, which were the Phoenix Journals, a series of books transmitted by the Pleiadian Galactic Federation of Light to Earth, nearly 200 journals during the time he worked with them. And the most interesting aspect of his story, despite his business success, was his work at Edwards Air Force Base. And he was definitely connected to these groups that he was talking about. So he had direct knowledge of what was going on with them.
Did you know Jillian, the lady he married from the UK, who's a clairvoyant?
I never met Jillian. His wife at that time was Desiree Green. I did meet her several times and spoke to her. I went to their home and spent some time with them. But I am aware of Jillian, and I have her book, The Violet Flame, and Other Meditations, which was published by his publishing company, America West.
And that ETA, that book too. But okay, I'm gonna ask these people here to ask. He's got a lot of information. He's not gonna get too heavy and talk about the Galactic Command and all the planets and all that, but yet today. But we want to keep it basic about abduction. So, Sally,
Yes.
Freddie, you got any questions of Norman? He's brilliant.
I don't have any questions right now. I'm totally vibing on where you're going with this, so we'll keep it basic.
Okay,
A question
Buddy.
in mind?
hold the mic up a little close.
I don't have a current question in mind. I want to just keep hearing more about the
Abduction.
perspective of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got a question. Oh, you want to go
No,
first?
no, go ahead.
I got a question.
Sure.
Recently, people are talking more and more about abduction. I don't know if it's something that's going around? I don't know if more people are getting involved or they're just less afraid to say things.
Well,
I wanted to ask him, why is it all of a sudden, I can't open up anything today without reading about, including the U.S. government, about abductions and UFOs.
okay. Norman, good question. What's happening? You have Disclosure 2024?
Yeah, what's happening is they're pushing this concept out in the open because they have a lot of hidden technology that they've acquired through working with various groups, including extraterrestrials and their own secret stuff they've been working on for a long time. These breakaway societies want to break back in, and they want to get this technology back into the space because they can't monetize it if it's in black budgets and it's hidden and it doesn't exist. So this, unfortunately, is a cash grab where they're trying to get this stuff back into the system so they can figure out what to do with it. And some of this stuff is alien technology, but they want to make money on it. So that's why they have these guys going in front of Congress and talking about aliens, talking about UAPs and the Navy and this and that. It's really just their desire to try to legitimize this technology.
Then I have another question. If that's true, then you're talking about people in Congress. They know what's going on. They don't know what's going on.
No, very little.
So they're being approached by
I don't
people
think
that do?
No, many of them are like us. They don't know very much because what they did in 1947, and Norman can address this, when they found the crash at Roswell, New Mexico, Truman was in power, and he put together an agency called Majestic 12, and he'll tell you about that, and also put together the CIA in the same year. So tell him why he put together and what happened when Eisenhower was elected in 1952 and all of that. Talk about that, Norman. Help him out.
Yeah, there's been a long power struggle for this UFO file, and the UFO file is a term that comes from a great guy on YouTube called Dark Journalist, which really is just a word that describes all the information that they currently have. And the UFO file gets bounced around like a hot potato between these various presidents and different alphabet agencies, like you said, the CIA and all the rest. They're constantly trying to control this. And there was two groups in the beginning. One group that wanted to make everything public, and they were in the disclosure, and then the other group that wanted to keep everything secret. And these two groups have been duking it out for a long time and have been in a fierce battle because one wants to push it forward and get people to see what's really going on. The other one wants to hide it all because they think that we can't handle it. So that's what you're seeing on the surface is the battle between these factions plays out in Congress and the White House and in the alphabet agencies, wherever else. They're really fighting each other.
You understand?
I get it.
It's a big fight. It's a big
It's
fight.
amazing because now I feel like the rest of us are with them, and that's supposed to be running the country.
No.
The people in Washington that are allowing the money to build these things, no?
Have you heard of Area 51?
Of course. Yeah.
Okay, what do you have heard about Area 51?
Is that was the government's way to show that they are researching and they're doing something about unanswered and unknown questions that haven't been fully. They're still in hypothesis stage.
The hypotheses?
The hypothesis stages, and they're trying to feed that out first before letting the general public know exactly what's going on in the world.
You hear that, Norman? Norman, talk about Area 51, Grooms Lake, and S4, and what happened with Eisenhower. Wanted to get the information from Alan Dulles, who was head of the CIA, and Alan Dulles refused to give him the information. What happened to that?
Yeah, I used to live in southern Nevada and was sometimes when I was traveling around town in Las Vegas, I would see the planes called Janet, Janet, Joint Air Network Employee Transport, that would take people out to Area 51 in addition to buses. And a guy that was big in Las Vegas at that time was George Knapp, who was talking a lot about aliens and Area 51 on TV before the rest of the country had ever even heard the phrase, before it was in the Will Smith movie, Independence Day and all the rest. So I'm pretty familiar with this, and Area 51 was always a place to test exotic technologies. It was Northrop Grumman and Lockheed and a lot of these other companies that were there doing a lot of things. So naturally, it was a place where they could hide and do anything they wanted to out there without anybody knowing. And they didn't even admit that it was real until, just a few years ago. They had to because they were legally forced to admit that it existed. And God knows what's gone on there over the years. They were already very active there with alien technology back in the 80s, and that's 40 years ago. So who knows what they're doing there now? But they've splintered this off because Area 51 gets so much press and so much exposure into other places, which a lot of researchers call Area 52, which is just a word people use for anything that's not in southern Nevada. Could be in Colorado, could be in Utah, could be in Idaho, who knows? And they've moved this stuff around, and including Central Australia is another big place. Pine Gap was another huge place for research like that.
Well, we talk about Dr. Greer, Stephen Greer. You have any questions?
Yeah, mine is basically about the Galactic Federation. I'm sure people listening know who they are, but I'm just wondering, how much involvement are they? I mean, I know we don't physically see them, but are there people, you may know the answer to this, that are among us from the Galactic Federation? My question would be, how much do they want? I know they're, like we would call maybe, they're a peacemaker. In other words, they want us to know, but how much can they divulge to us to help Earth right now?
That's a great question. And I love the fact that you use peacemaker, because all of their efforts, really going back to the 40s and it became much more expansive in the 80s, have been trying to persuade mankind to choose peace and to not choose war, to go away from nuclear weapons, to go away from utilizing these dangerous technologies that we don't totally understand, like Bob Lazar talked about, scientists dying trying to manipulate these devices that supposedly came from alien craft, people being blown up, underground facilities getting blown up. So the galactics, especially the Palladians, are always trying to push for peace and for knowledge and transparency. They are among us constantly, and they do exist in our society, but they have a very fine line between interference and assistance. They have a lot of respect for humans, and they have to constantly evaluate their own activities to make sure that they're not turning themselves into gods. They're turning themselves into heroes that we worship, and we expect them to fix everything for us. They have to be careful, but they are heavily involved. And I believe that they're substantially involved in what's going on now in American politics and global politics, with giving advice and or encouragement to world leaders to choose a better path, especially in times right now.
Thank you.
Freddie, one of the things that Norman is talking about, if you want it, for most people who haven't known that history, we don't want to get too heavy, but if you can go to a documentary, it's free. If you go to Google The Lost Century, you pull that down, it's about an hour, 10 minutes. Dr. Greer produced that. And he had another one prior to that that 700 million people have watched, called Unacknowledged. He did that about a year ago. Norman, have you seen both of those?
I haven't specifically watched those, but I have seen bits and pieces. A lot of the clips from those are popular on social media. I was aware of Greer in 1990, now 34 years ago, when he very, very first began his process of gathering together whistleblowers, people who had worked in the military and intelligence agencies. And that's where he started his whole push, was to get credibility from whistleblowers and experts. And he's done that. And I don't agree with everything that he puts out there or every conclusion that he draws, but I think he's a really interesting person. And we don't get to pick and choose the perfect person to tell us about what's going on. We have to deal with what's out there. And I have to give him credit for sticking with this for 3 decades and putting out very compelling, very thought-provoking information.
The thing.
Yeah, I have something to add to what he was talking about. When it comes to when you were pointing out the people that we have at this very moment to learn from, in the perspective of the ancient worlds, how would you explain that? The way that it was depicted, even in certain images and storytelling of these similar hypotheses and sightings, how would you explain what they experienced and how they impacted our culture as humans were evolving back in even ancient times?
I think
that's a great question. It would take a long time to answer.
Yeah, that's my most profound question.
Russ, you mentioned Billy Carson, and if anyone isn't familiar with Billy Carson, he runs Forbidden Knowledge I think that's what it's called. He's got a whole bunch of stuff going on. He's all over social media. He's really blown up in the last year, and I have to give him a tremendous amount of credit again. Not 100% of his conclusions are perfectly aligned with my particular point of view, but he is out there pushing on the connection between ancient knowledge, our awareness of ancient history, the problem that we have with the archaeologists and the timelines, and how that relates to this whole issue of aliens. It is all connected. The Ancient Aliens TV show was trying to get it out there. They were laughed at. But Billy Carson's done great. He's a great person to go to if that stuff interests any of you. He is all over that ancient alien connection.
Mm-hmm. How would you phrase in Dr. Zachariah Sitchin?
I was just going to ask, you read my mind about Zachariah Sitchin.
Right, go ahead.
That's so strange. I'm sorry to interrupt. My next question was, Zachariah Sitchin and his teachings, for me, I found amazing when I first started to understand this. And I was just going to recommend him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I also want to remind people that this show is going to be airing tonight on South Florida Oldies, 95.9, 106.9, 95.3, and 96.9. You can also write in any questions you want on social media. You can call the studio, 888-994-4995, Studio A. But if you leave any questions on social media, we will get back to you to get some answers, because people usually have a tendency of doing it afterwards.
Some people might want to be on the program. Then somebody has said, "But I was abducted," or "I'm a contactee." See, people who are abducted, that's one group of people. Then the others are fortunate, I think, like George Green was. He was a contactee. They came and sat in front of him and said, "George, we got a job from the Pallades." Talk about that, Norman.
This is an amazing story, and I do want to get back to Zechariah Sitchin and people like Eric von Daniken, who were the pioneers, but let's look at George Green. So his experience is really interesting. It builds on the sightings and the experiences of one Edward Billy Meyer of Switzerland, who in the 70s had prolific contact with the Palladians. He took a lot of pictures, which are very famous or infamous, depending upon how you view him. He's got attacked a lot. And his writings are prolific. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of pages from the Palladians, giving all kinds of cool information about our lives and our future and our past, and how to do better as humans. And so 10 or 15 years later, here comes George Green in a new program called Earth Project Transition, which basically became the Phoenix Journals, which were, like I mentioned, about 200 books, one a month, that were put out by a wonderful woman named Doris Ecker, who went by the name of Dharma. And she transcribed this stuff from the Palladians, 100-plus page book a month for nearly 10 years. I have dozens of these, and people can get them online. You can download the PDFs and look at them for free. The Palladians, through George Green, built upon what they taught Edward Meyer in Switzerland in the 70s, and built upon that narrative to really come up with very, very deep, comprehensive ideas, way deeper than just the ideas we're looking at. I won't get into all that. But the contact was, again, benevolent, peaceful, teaching, guidance, and they believe that our distant ancestors are their distant ancestors, so they are kin of us. And this is why they really felt compelled to contact us and to be involved in this, is that we have shared ancestry. It was people, human beings from long ago in the earth who left to go to the Pleiades, and they've returned. So they're not really aliens in that sense. They are our kin, they are our ancestors, and they are a version of us from the future as well.
I had a question.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, right. Sure.
For the aliens, were they like fallen angels, or they have a different class to themselves?
That's what I was going to add when it came to what he was just explaining. But I'd like to hear his answer first.
Yeah, this is another very complex question. And Zechariah Sitchin brings this up, and Eric von Daniken and the rest, these old school guys that are, really old school ancient aliens people, talk a lot about this, trying to reconcile what happened in the Bible, what happened with the Anunnaki, which is an old Mesopotamian race from long ago, the Egyptians, and to try to reconcile these different cultures and writings And then our modern view of aliens is these sort of flying saucer people, and it causes a lot of conflict and contemplation for people to try to deal with all this stuff. There's a lot there, and I'm a Christian, but a lot of Christians look at aliens and say, well, that's the devil, and that's the work of the devil. That's not a real thing. These are spiritual beings who are now coming back for maybe reasons good or bad. It's too complex to get into here, but it's definitely important to try to reconcile that. And the Pleiadians, one of their most important tasks through George Green and through the journals was to address these questions and get them out in the open and talk about angels versus extraterrestrials and talk about the Bible and talk about this stuff and what did it all mean and what basis does it have? Because there's a lot of muddy water out there with these ideas, and a lot of times people just give up on it because it's too complicated. The stories are just too twisted and weird, and they get concerned, and rightfully so. There's a lot of junk out there.
Yeah, it's a lot of information, obviously. I mean, tons and tons. Michael Seller, he does a great job in terms of explaining a lot of that, the Galactic Command, and talk about the people on the spaceships.
Can I recommend a book?
Ahead.
I believe it was Zachariah Sitchin. It's Genesis Revisited, because it answers a lot where the Bible and what is going on is kind of explained, I believe. I read it a long time ago. But Genesis Revisited, I believe it was Zachariah Sitchin that wrote it. Am I right?
Oh yeah, the 12th planet. That's
the 12th
planet
That's
too,
yeah.
Zachariah Sitchin.
But I think it helped me in the very beginning to understand a little bit more. Whereas if you're reading the Bible, I'm not really that religious, but I could see the connection.
Let's talk about abductions.
I have one more question. I was saying, from back in the day, we had powers and whatnot, and Wi-Fi and Bluetooth dumbed us down. Was that us that built the pyramids, or did aliens come help us with that?
Ooh,
It's a perspective.
Question is, are we prepared to get the answer?
Well, there's so many
Say that
answers.
in a different way. Say that question in a different way.
I'm saying, like back in the day, we had powers and whatnot, but throughout like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and technology has dumbed us down to connecting with our powers and whatnot. So did we lift those rocks, or was it like aliens that came to help us? The pyramids.
It's a great question. So the fork in the road is Edison and Tesla. When we had to choose between Tesla technology, and it's not going back to the pyramid.
But they said themselves as Tesla is an alien.
Edison versus Tesla. Tesla was in contact with the Venusians, and this is widely documented. There's a book called Return of the Dove from a woman named Margaret Storm, I think is her name, which details his contact with the Venusians. Edison was in no way in contact with any kind of aliens or anything. He was in it for money. He didn't care if his technology ruined our society. And when we chose Edison technology over Tesla technology, we walked away from all that stuff that would have come from ancient Egypt, from Atlantis, and the rest. All that technology was lost, and it was lost with Tesla. And that's when we chose one path over the other.
What kind of time we got? Yeah, Nikola Tesla, he died in about 1942 in New York City, but he was a brilliant, absolutely one most brilliant person out there in terms of the radio and all the stuff that energy fields and all that. Let's bring back about 2 minutes, 3 minutes left. But look, Norman, for new people who don't understand or don't believe maybe in Hollow Earth, because Hollow Earth is real. People, cities and all that. Under every pyramid, there's tunnels that go all across the broad spectrum of the Earth. How about people being abducted? Can you talk about that for a minute? How can people tell or know that they have been abducted? And how big is that picture?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a trigger warning because really people are not going to agree with me or maybe disagree with me. The Pleiadians are very blunt in saying that reports of alien abductions and encounters are actually human engineered events designed to cover up secret science experiments. By blaming aliens, these powerful groups avoid responsibility for their unethical activities, and this is a hoax for the most part. because I can't cover 100% of the spectrum, but the Pleiadians are very clear that these alien abductions are staged to hide the technological experiments that they're working on, cloning, anti-gravitic technology, and a lot of this other stuff they've been testing out on people for a long time. I don't want to discount anybody's experience or make any claims against anyone, but that's my take on it, and it's very controversial, but I stand by that.
If we're going on the controversy of opinion, I do agree with you in a sense. I've never particularly heard that perspective, so that's a great thing to say. But in my perspective, when it comes to abductions versus people that talk about astral projection and spiritual connectivity, there's a totally different feeling is what they get. So if your perspective of being abducted has to do with government cover-ups, it's true because people do feel differently when they tell the story of how they were abducted versus people that have spiritual astral projection processes. They feel like, oh my God, I learned so much through this.
Okay.
It's this difference of fear and expansion.
We need a part 2 to this show.
That's part 2. That's part 2. Next week we'll continue with abductions and get some specificity about what's going on.
Absolutely.
Do you want to close it out?
Yes, again, you can reach out to Russell. We're going to be playing this show tonight on the radio. You can reach out to us. We'll answer whatever questions. I think the concept here, and she's a newbie, I already feel like I'm going to school learning.
Yeah, she's good. Yeah, she's probably been abducted. But anyway.
I think she's done some. I think she has studied a little.
I can find out.
I mean, but that's when I know we're about to end the show. But personally, when it comes to that, it's being profound and seeing what you have felt and using that as your knowledge versus what he was saying, the perspective of maybe being abducted for testing. I feel like people talk about different feelings versus that versus a spiritual connection.
All right, say goodbye.
Part 2. Hey, folks, thank you very much. We hope we didn't confuse you. Next week we'll be right here for part 2 of abductions, counter mutilations, and all of the above. And thank you. I really appreciate you guys being on the program today. Thank you very much. See you next week. Same time, same place.
Thank you for joining us on Lights in the Night. Keep your eyes on the skies and stay curious. Until next time.